Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we are going to explain another case of a family who was murdered. Stick till the end to know what actually happened. On August 13, 2018, at approximately 1:48 a.m., Shanann Watts, a 34-year-old mother of two and 15 weeks pregnant with her third child, returned home from a Thrive business trip to Arizona. She was dropped off by her friend and colleague Nico Atkinson, who later became the first to raise concerns about her disappearance. Shanann lived at 2825 Saratoga Trail in Frederick, Colorado, with her husband Christopher Lee Watts and their two daughters, Bella Marie Watts, born December 17, 2013, and Celeste Catherine Watts, born July 17, 2015. The home was located in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and Chris Watts was employed by Anadarko Petroleum as an operator at an oil field site. Shanann worked from home promoting Levelum health products, including their flagship brand Thrive, and often shared updates about her family life on social media. Atkinson became concerned the following morning, August 13th, when Shanann missed an obstetrics appointment and failed to return calls or respond to text messages. She contacted Chris Watts, who told her Shanann had taken the girls on a play date. When Atkinson drove to the Watts residence later that morning, she observed Shanann's car still in the garage and her purse, phone, and medication left inside. She notified Frederick Police Department, and Officer Scott Coonrod arrived at 1:40 p.m. to perform a welfare check. Chris Watts arrived shortly afterward and permitted Officer Coonrod to enter the house. Inside, officers noted no signs of struggle. Shanann's phone, keys, purse, and the children's medications were all present. The master bed sheets were missing. Chris stated that Shanann had told him she was taking the girls to a friend's house and hadn't returned. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's home, reviewed later that day in Chris's presence, showed Chris backing his truck into the garage, unloading items early in the morning, contradicting his claim that Shanann had left with the children. Officer Coonrod observed that Chris appeared unusually calm and had little concern when informed that Shanann's phone and belongings were still in the house. Chris gave multiple inconsistent statements, both to officers and during voluntary interviews conducted on August 14th and 15th. Meanwhile, Shanann and the children were officially reported missing, and local, state, and federal agencies were brought in, including the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On August 14th, the case gained national attention as media outlets began reporting on the missing mother and children. Chris participated in televised interviews on local news channels, pleading for their return and claiming he had no idea where they had gone. During his interviews, body language analysts and the public began pointing out that his tone and behavior appeared rehearsed and emotionally detached. Investigators quickly focused on Chris's inconsistencies. On August 15th, he agreed to take a polygraph test conducted by Tammy Lee, an FBI special agent. The test results indicated significant deception when he denied knowing where Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were. Following the polygraph, Agent Lee confronted Chris with the results and told him the test indicated he was lying. Chris requested to speak with his father, Ronnie Watts. During that conversation, which was monitored by law enforcement, Chris confessed that he had killed Shanann, but claimed that it was in a rage after witnessing her strangle their daughters. This version of events was not supported by any evidence. He later provided investigators with the location of the bodies at an oil site owned by Anadarko, approximately 40 miles away in Rogan, Weld County, Colorado. On August 16th, authorities located the bodies at the site. Shanann's body was found buried in a shallow grave. The bodies of Bella and Celeste were recovered from separate oil tanks on the same property. Investigators reported that the oil tanks were nearly full and had narrow openings of about 8 inches in diameter. According to subsequent interviews with investigators, Chris admitted to driving to the site with Shanann's body and the girl still alive. He claimed to have smothered Celeste with a blanket while Bella watched. He then smothered Bella, who allegedly pleaded, "Daddy, no." On August 17th, the Weld County coroner conducted autopsies. Shanann's cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. The fetus she was carrying was expelled due to decomposition. Bella and Celeste's deaths were caused by smothering. Bella had blunt force trauma to her jaw consistent with being forced into the tank. Toxicology reports showed that both girls had oil residue in their throats and lungs. On August 21, 2018, the Weld County District Attorney's Office formally charged Chris Watts with 9 felony counts, 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each victim, plus 2 for each child under age 12, killed by a person in a position of trust, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He was held without bond. The public became increasingly engaged with the case as documents were unsealed, including interrogation transcripts, crime scene photos, and forensic reports. Court records revealed that Watts had been involved in an extramarital affair with a co-worker named Nico. Kessinger told investigators that Watts had claimed he was in the process of separating from his wife, but she said she had no knowledge of the murders and cooperated with authorities. Investigators found that Watts had begun deleting text messages and attempting to clean up his digital presence. Kessinger's internet history showed searches for topics such as "Can people trace deleted messages?" and Amber Frey, a known mistress in a prior high-profile murder case involving Scott Peterson. She also searched for wedding dresses, vacation spots, and apartments in the days leading up to the murders. Prosecutors stated that Watts had been planning a new life and viewed his family as an obstacle. Chris Watts waived his right to a preliminary hearing and opted to take a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, which had been previously legal in Colorado, later abolished in 2020. On November 6, 2018, he pleaded guilty to all 9 counts, in exchange for the prosecution seeking the death penalty, a condition supported by Shanann's family. At the sentencing hearing on November 19, 2018, Judge Marcello Kopkow sentenced Watts to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, including 3 to be served consecutively and 2 concurrently for the murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico. He was also sentenced to an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with a deceased human body, totaling 84 additional years. Watts was initially placed in the Colorado Department of Corrections, but was later transferred for safety reasons to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he remains incarcerated. Following the conviction, Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke described the case as the most inhumane and vicious crime he had ever prosecuted. The release of the affidavit, surveillance footage, interrogation videos, and the eventual Netflix documentary American Murder, The Family Next Door, led to continued public fascination with the case, according to documents released by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in early 2019. Watts provided further details about the murders in a 5-hour prison interview with law enforcement. He confessed to strangling Shanann in their bed after an emotional conversation and loading her body into his truck along with the 2 girls, who were still alive. He stated that Bella and Celeste dozed on and off during the drive to the oil site. He described killing Celeste with a blanket in the back seat of the truck, then doing the same to Bella after she asked, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cease?" He admitted to pushing each child into separate oil tanks and burying Shanann nearby. He stated he was unsure what made him do it, but claimed he felt like something had taken over him. Watts' statements were corroborated by evidence recovered from the crime scene, his phone records, and forensic analysis. The FBI, CBI, and local law enforcement closed the investigation, citing a full confession and overwhelming physical evidence. Following his initial arrest, Chris Watts remained in Weld County Jail while investigators began compiling additional forensic evidence, digital records, and interviews. On August 16, 2018, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's crime scene team collected items from the Watts home, including bedding, trash from the kitchen, vacuum canisters, a sheet with a reddish stain found in a trash can, and items from the children's bedrooms. That same day, a drone survey of the Anadarko oil site in Rogan, Colorado was conducted, confirming the location where Shanann's body had been buried and where Bella and Celeste's remains had been submerged inside the battery tanks. Crime scene investigators documented the oil site with aerial imagery and on-ground photography, confirming disturbances in the soil where Shanann had been interred and the tightly sealed hatches that concealed the girls. According to the recovery team, the children's remains were retrieved from separate oil tanks that contained a toxic mixture of crude oil and chemicals. The tanks had small hatches, approximately 8 inches in diameter, and investigators noted that Watts likely forced the children's bodies through those openings post-mortem. On August 17, 2018, autopsies were conducted on all 3 victims. By the Weld County Coroner's Office, Shanann's cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. Her injuries included bruising on her neck consistent with finger pressure, and petechial hemorrhages in the eyes. The fetus, Nico, had been expelled from her uterus post-mortem due to decomposition gases. Bella's autopsy revealed signs of blunt force trauma on her jaw and injuries consistent with smothering. The autopsy further showed she had oil residue in her nasal passages, indicating she had been placed into the tank shortly after death. Celeste's autopsy revealed nearly identical cause of death: smothering with soft tissue damage consistent with pressure to the mouth and nose. There were no defensive wounds on either child. Toxicology tests on all 3 revealed no drugs or sedatives in their systems. These findings, together with the timeline of Chris's movements tracked via phone GPS, work records, and neighborhood surveillance footage, strengthened the state's case. Meanwhile, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the FBI reviewed Watts' digital activity. Cell phone extractions revealed he had been in near constant contact with Nico Kessinger in the weeks prior to the murders. Text messages between Chris and Nico included romantic language, discussions of a future together, and plans to move forward as a couple. Investigators interviewed Kessinger, who confirmed she had been in a relationship with Watts and claimed she was unaware that Shanann was pregnant. She said that Chris told her he and Shanann were separating amicably. Kessinger's search history was preserved and showed queries such as marrying your mistress, can people trace text messages, and Amber Frey book deal. These records were included in the discovery released later by Weld County. Kessinger voluntarily spoke with authorities multiple times and provided her phone for a forensic examination. While there was no evidence that she was directly involved in the murders or knew they had occurred, public scrutiny intensified due to the timing of the relationship and the content of her searches. Investigators focused on establishing the premeditation aspect of the murders. In the days leading up to August 13th, Chris had stopped answering Shanann's calls and seemed emotionally detached, according to texts recovered from Shanann's phone. On August 7th, Shanann sent a message to a friend expressing worrying that Chris no longer touched or spoke to her the same way. Texts between Shanann and her friend documented that she had become suspicious of infidelity and expressed confusion about Chris's emotional distance. Financial stress was also evident. The Watts family was behind on mortgage payments, had filed for a bankruptcy in 2015, and were dealing with mounting credit card debt. Shanann's spending, while linked to her Thrive business expenses, had created tension, according to Watts' later confession to investigators. Chris Watts, when questioned during a subsequent prison interview, February 18, 2019, with investigators from the FBI, CBI, and Frederick Police Department, provided a more detailed and disturbing account of the murders. In this 5-hour recorded session, he admitted that the killing was not spontaneous, but had formed in his mind days earlier. He stated that the idea of a new life with Kessinger, without the burden of family responsibilities, seemed easier than facing a divorce. Watts described that he strangled Shanann in their bed after she confronted him about the affair, and then wrapped her body in a sheet. He claimed their daughters awoke shortly afterward and walked into the room. He told them Shanann was sick and would be going to the hospital. He then loaded Shanann's body into his truck and placed both girls still alive into the back seat. They asked questions during the 45-minute drive to the Anadarko site. Once there, he removed Shanann's body and placed it near the burial site, then returned to the truck and smothered Celeste using a blanket. Bella, according to Watts's account, watched and asked, "Is the same thing going to happen to me?" He then smothered Bella and forced both bodies into separate oil tanks. These confessions matched the autopsy findings and digital timeline constructed by law enforcement. Watts also admitted to cleaning up parts of the house after the murders and intentionally discarding items in a kitchen trash can to reduce visible evidence. The forensic examination of the house later confirmed that bed sheets had been removed and that certain items had been freshly washed. A reddish stain was found on a bedsheet in the kitchen trash, which was later determined to be consistent with decomposition fluids. All of this evidence, combined with Watts's confessions, text messages, GPS data, oil-field keycard records, and surveillance footage, allowed prosecutors to file formal charges. On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was formally charged with 9 counts, 3 counts of first-degree murder for each victim, 2 additional counts for the deaths of Bella and Celeste due to their age and his position of trust, 1 count for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He was held without bond at the Weld County Jail as public pressure mounted and documents were released to the media. The case gained national and international attention. The district attorney's office, led by Michael Rourke, began preparing for trial, but also engaged in negotiations with Watts's defense team. Shanann's family made it publicly known that they did not wish to pursue the death penalty, preferring a resolution that would avoid prolonged trial proceedings and public re-traumatization. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts entered a guilty plea to all 9 counts. In exchange, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty. The plea agreement was formally entered into the court record and was accepted by Judge Marcello Kopkow. On November 19, 2018, Watts appeared in Weld County District Court for sentencing. During the hearing, victim impact statements were read by Shanann's family, including her father, Frank Ruchek, who described the loss of his daughter and grandchildren. The district attorney detailed the deliberate nature of the crimes and stated that Watts made a series of conscious decisions to annihilate his family. Judge Kopkow sentenced Chris Watts to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 of which were to be served consecutively and to concurrently. Additional sentences included 48 years for unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with a deceased human body. Following sentencing, Watts was placed in custody with the Colorado Department of Corrections, but was soon transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, due to security concerns and threats from other inmates. The official case was closed by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation following the February 2019 confession and documentation of all related forensic, digital, and testimonial evidence. Chris Watts remains incarcerated under Colorado Department of Corrections jurisdiction, serving multiple life sentences for the murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn Nico Watts. Following his sentencing in November 2018, Chris Watts was transferred out of Colorado Department of Corrections custody and placed at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, under protective custody due to the high-profile nature of his case and potential threats from other inmates. This transfer was arranged through an interstate corrections compact allowing states to move prisoners for security reasons. Once in Wisconsin, Watts began serving 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with additional decades-long terms for tampering with the bodies and the unlawful termination of a pregnancy. In early 2019, following the closing of the official investigation, Watts was interviewed in prison on February 18th by representatives from the FBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and Frederick Police Department in a 5-hour recorded session, where he provided more detailed and disturbing descriptions of the events leading up to and following the murders. That interview was transcribed and released to the public by CBI in March 2019, and it revealed new admissions that had not been part of the original case file, including the fact that both daughters had been alive during the drive to the oil field. Watts claimed that Bella asked about her sister after Celeste was killed, and that Bella fought back before she was murdered, according to his own statement. These details matched the autopsy findings, which showed defensive injuries on Bella. Following the release of that confession, the public response reignited media attention and criticism toward Watts's previous public statements. Shanann's family responded through their legal representatives by reaffirming their commitment to keeping the case factual and discouraging speculation or conspiracy theories. Around the same time, numerous FOIA Freedom of Information Act requests were filed by media outlets and independent investigators, leading to the release of thousands of pages of case discovery documents, including text messages, phone logs, financial records, interrogation transcripts, forensic analysis, digital evidence reports, and crime scene photos. These documents revealed how closely investigators were able to reconstruct the days leading up to the murders and established a clear timeline, supported by GPS data, security footage, and text logs. In late 2020, Netflix released a documentary titled American Murder: The Family Next Door, which used only archival footage, bodycam videos, text messages, and police interviews to present the case without reenactments or narration. The documentary reached a global audience and became one of the most streamed crime documentaries at the time of its release. It renewed interest in the case and prompted additional public scrutiny of Watts's behavior, as well as discussions around domestic violence, financial manipulation, and psychological profiling. In 2021, Shanann's family filed and won a wrongful death lawsuit against Watts, awarding them $6 million in damages, a judgment that includes $1 million for each death and $3 million for emotional pain and suffering. While symbolic, the judgment legally restricts Watts from profiting off his story through media deals, books, or interviews. Since his incarceration, Watts has received letters from the public, some supportive and others hostile. According to prison correspondence logs obtained via public record requests, he responded to several letters and expressed religious conversion, claiming he had turned to Christianity and began studying the Bible. Prison officials confirmed that Watts has remained in administrative segregation for his safety and has minimal contact with other inmates. He has no access to television interviews or public broadcasts about his case, inmates and staff reported. He spends most of his time reading and avoids direct conversations about the crimes. In 2022, additional audio from his prison calls was released through public records, in which he repeated his confession, but also made statements some analysts interpreted as attempts to reframe the motives behind his actions. Law enforcement and prosecutors have reiterated that his confession was detailed, consistent with evidence, and sufficient to close the investigation entirely. No additional charges or suspects have ever been named in connection with the case. Online, interest in the case remained high, with forums and YouTube channels continuing to analyze transcripts, autopsy reports, and timelines. The Frederick Police Department and Weld County DA's office issued multiple statements discouraging speculation and urging the public to refer only to primary source documents released officially. In 2023, the Colorado Department of Corrections confirmed via public release that Watts remained in Wisconsin and had not filed any appeals or motions for sentence reduction. His prison record showed no major infractions, and he remained in protective custody. The Dodge Correctional Institution classified his security level as maximum, and any movement within the facility I'd escort. Reports from official prison records confirmed that Watts is expected to remain in Wisconsin indefinitely, with no plans to transfer or alter his status. By 2024, there were no active legal proceedings involving Chris Watts, and the original investigators involved in the case had either been reassigned or retired. The case continues to be used in law enforcement training seminars and criminal justice coursework as an example of digital forensics, family annihilation psychology, and the importance of victim advocacy in domestic violence cases. Shanann Watts and her daughters are remembered publicly through memorials and digital tributes maintained by family and community members in North Carolina and Colorado. Their gravesite remains private and monitored by family members, with legal restrictions placed on any attempt to exploit or commercialize the location. No official biography, book deal, or authorized documentary from the Watts family or Shanann's parents has been produced as of mid-2025, and any projects relating to the case have relied solely on publicly released documents and footage. By early 2025, public interest in the case persisted, with ongoing discussions in digital spaces and continued document requests through FOIA filings. These included audio of Watts's prison phone calls and letters sent to and from Dodge Correctional Institution, while Chris Watts remained incarcerated under maximum security with no known violations on his record. The Colorado Department of Corrections periodically confirmed his location and custodial status in response to media and public inquiries. He continued to be held in Wisconsin for protective custody, and his housing was listed as administrative segregation. These measures were deemed necessary due to the nature of his crimes and the high level of media exposure. Journalists and documentarians periodically submitted interview requests through the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, all of which were either ignored or denied. No direct media access has been granted to Watts since his sentencing. Despite this, his name has appeared in prison mailing records as having corresponded with individuals who wrote to him about religion, forgiveness, or personal sympathy, although state officials redacted full identities and contents of those communications. Shanann's family, particularly her father Frank Ruchek, continued advocating for stricter privacy protections for crime victims' families, citing repeated online harassment and the spread of false information. In 2021, the Azucheks filed a civil lawsuit against several creators and channels who promoted conspiracy theories that Shanann had faked her death or was involved in some kind of cover-up. The Ruchek family's court filings outlined examples of defamation and digital harassment, including the publication of false claims that Bella and Celeste were alive after the date confirmed in forensic findings. That lawsuit resulted in a legal settlement that established clearer limits around cyber harassment connected to high-profile crime cases. The Weld County District Attorney's Office and Colorado Bureau of Investigation continued to release occasional updates reaffirming that all physical evidence, forensic records, autopsy reports, GPS logs, text messages, and audio recordings supported the sequence of events confessed by Watts in training seminars and forensic science lectures. The case was repeatedly cited as a textbook example of modern digital forensics. Law enforcement had used everything from smart home data to cell tower triangulation, text message retrieval, oil site keycard records, and surveillance video to construct a timeline so detailed that Watts was unable to maintain a consistent false narrative. Additionally, law enforcement emphasized the psychological components of the interrogation techniques used by FBI agent Tammy Lee and Colorado investigators, including the Reid technique and behavioral analysis cues that played a key role in Watts' eventual confession. Despite multiple requests from documentary teams and crime writers, no interviews have been granted to Chris Watts since his 2019 confession. In a 2020 clarification document submitted by CBI and the Frederick Police Department, all physical and testimonial evidence used in the prosecution of Watts was logged, verified, and closed as a complete case. There have been no appeals filed by Watts' legal team, and no motions submitted for sentence review or reduction. His public defender, who managed the plea deal, confirmed shortly after the sentencing that Watts had waived his rights to appeal as a condition of avoiding the death penalty. Periodically, misinformation or hoaxes surface online claiming that Watts has released a book or that new evidence has emerged. However, these claims are routinely denied by Colorado authorities, who maintain that the case remains fully resolved under the terms of the original confession and sentencing. The Watts family home at 2825 Saratoga Trail has remained vacant since the murders. Attempts to sell or auction the house have repeatedly failed due to the notoriety of the crime, and the property was formally foreclosed in late 2019. Real estate records confirm that the home has been maintained but remains unsold, with local residents petitioning to have the address removed from online listings. Shanann's surviving family members have established multiple online memorials and maintain a scholarship fund in her name. They have requested repeatedly that the victims be remembered accurately and with respect. In July 2023, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence added Shanann's story to a public archive used for training and prevention outreach. The case has also been referenced in multiple professional criminology and psychology journals, analyzing family annihilation patterns and sociopathic behavior masked by public charm and family image. There is no indication that any other individuals were ever involved in the crime. Nico, the co-worker with whom Chris had an affair, has legally changed her name and location after voluntarily cooperating with law enforcement. According to documents released in 2019, she provided her full cell phone records, deleted texts, and online history to authorities and voluntarily met with investigators on multiple occasions. She denied knowing anything about the murders prior to Watts' arrest and was not charged with any crime. In sealed court records, later reviewed by the press, Kessinger's testimony confirmed that she had ended the relationship with Watts shortly after learning of Shanann's disappearance. The courts and CBI concluded there was no basis for further investigation into her involvement. Public fascination with the case has continued largely through online communities that review and analyze the timeline of events, Watts' behavior during media interviews, and the comprehensive digital forensics used to confirm his movements, communications, and actions. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation has released no additional evidence since 2021, and no reinvestigation has been announced or proposed. Watts remains on permanent lockdown with limited personal privileges and no eligibility for parole under Colorado law. Inmates under his classification in Wisconsin allowed limited phone calls and no unsupervised interaction with others. Prison logs confirm that Watts has made no public statements and that all known communications are reviewed by facility security personnel. No new confession has been submitted, and his initial February 2019 interview remains the final and official narrative acknowledged by law enforcement. Despite the absence of any further legal developments, the case remains active in academic research and legal discourse, particularly around issues of plea bargaining in capital cases and post-conviction behavior in high-profile murderers. Chris Watts' name appears in multiple psychological profiling databases and scholarly publications analyzing filicide, narcissism, and covert domestic violence behaviors. As of mid-2025, no legislative changes in Colorado have been directly linked to the case, but advocates continue to push for reforms involving family protection and public misinformation laws to shield surviving families from prolonged trauma online. By late 2025, the Chris Watts case remained a defining reference point in criminal justice education, digital forensics training, and public conversations about domestic violence, narcissistic abuse, and the psychology of family annihilators. With no new developments in the legal system and no parole ever possible, the case has remained fully closed in the eyes of law enforcement. No appeal has ever been filed. Colorado authorities have reiterated that the investigation yielded conclusive, irrefutable evidence, physical, forensic, and digital, all of it corroborated by a full confession given post-sentencing in a secured prison interview. Chris Watts continues to serve out his 5 consecutive life sentences plus 84 additional years at Dodge Correctional Institution under maximum security conditions. Without the possibility of release, there is no official or legal path forward for Watts outside incarceration, and his communications remain monitored. He is one of the most closely watched and socially condemned individuals in modern true crime history. Shanann's family has remained active in preserving her memory and the legacy of Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico, focusing on public awareness, victim advocacy, and educational outreach. Their efforts have helped protect other families from online exploitation and have driven renewed conversations about early intervention in cases of silent emotional abuse within families. Despite conspiracies and misinformation, the facts of the case remain publicly accessible through police files, court documents, forensic records, and official transcripts. Everything stated in this series is based solely on verified evidence gathered by law enforcement, the FBI, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. This case is not entertainment. It is a reminder of how evil can hide behind smiles, of how manipulation can replace empathy, and how silence inside a home can mask the loudest forms of suffering. It's important to remember the names of those lost not just in death, but in how they lived. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico were more than victims. They were a mother and children who deserved to be safe, heard, and protected. If this story impacted you, if it chilled you, angered you, or reminded you that real evil can wear normal faces, then make your voice part of the memory. Share this video so others can understand the full truth, like it to show support for the real victims, and subscribe to our channel to uncover more true stories, told without sensationalism and based only on facts. Keep their names alive. Keep the truth in the light. And never forget that behind every headline, there are real lives, real pain, and a duty to remember. Thank you for watching.